y'all, it's Mary, and I'm so excited you're here for this month's topic, which is all about identity. But before we hop into today's episode, we need to be asking the essential question, who am I? This month we'll explore the ins and outs of what makes us us, and I'll help you come back home to your authentic self.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt, here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA Presidential Diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey y'all, it is Mary Hyatt, and welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast for our final episode on this month's topic of identity. This is kind of a bonus episode because who knew that the month of July, where we're at in 2019, depending on when you're listening to this, actually had 5 weeks. So we get a bonus week, and I couldn't think of a better bonus than to bring on the real bonus.
Hey.
Lindsley Brooks, my fabulous co-host. How you doing, girl?
Hi everyone. I'm good.
Good. Well, I'm excited about today's conversation because I don't know about you, but this is something that keeps coming up with my one-on-one coaching clients is this idea of imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And when I kind of talked to you about this the other night over oysters and cocktails.
That's our business meeting now, is doing happy hour.
It's pretty great. We started talking about this, and I said, a lot of my clients, even though they are very successful in what they do professionally, they feel like an imposter. They feel like a fraud. And it's interesting because, these women are brilliant women. They're the kind of women that other people I know are looking at as the kind of women who are setting the bar really high for professional women and are cranking it out and are making a lot of money and are professional and carry themselves incredibly well. And yet every single one of them, no fail, everyone will say at some point within our coaching experience together, I feel like I'm a fraud and I'm afraid to get exposed. Mm-hmm. And so we started talking about this just in our own life and how we personally have felt this way before. But I want you to talk about first, as we kind of hop into this topic of what it looks like to feel as a woman like a fraud, which is ultimately part of the conversation about identity, that we don't feel like we are us, ourselves. But you found something interesting when you started to research this, and I want you to share that.
Yeah. So when Mary and I started thinking about, so what is this term, imposter syndrome? We actually learned that there's a term for this, and then we've heard of course, feeling like a fraud, all these terms that we just throw around. There's actually a real term. So the term imposter phenomenon was actually where it started. And it was coined by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978.
Wow.
And it was used to describe the internal experience of a group of high-achieving women, ironically enough, who described feelings of intellectual phoniness despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments. Later referred to as the imposter syndrome, which is kind of what we all know of now. The defining characteristic is feeling like a fraud, believing that others perceive you more favorably than is true and warranted. And when I saw that, I was like, wait a minute, this whole thing started because of women feeling this innate discomfort, this innate awkwardness of not really feeling like they are as smart or as brilliant. People may think that I'm this way, and yet inside I'm feeling like a scared little girl or some kind of version of a dissonance that is not, you're just afraid that if it gets exposed that it's all going to come out and it's a house of cards. So I thought that was so fascinating. And then this has been going on 1978 is when this term came up.
It's fascinating because of what you just said, which you said, we're all a scared little girl. And what I talked about on the episode last week, I talked about the 4 essential selves, the ego, the subconscious, the inner child, and the highest self. So if you haven't listened to that episode, make sure to go back to last week to listen to that, because I think what you're talking about, what you're hitting on, is so many of us carry these wounds from our childhood where somebody made us believe we were less than what we were. And it's almost like our ego goes on overdrive and we start working to prove our worthiness. And so, like you're saying, I mean, high achieving women
Yep.
who are going out there and hustling and busting their balls and really, think about the 70s and all of that, the lack of female equality in the
Yes.
workplace
Yeah.
and everything that was going on during that time, and how hard women had to try to make a name for themselves within a corporate professional setting. And it's like, wow, we're still dealing with that today. The feeling like no matter what we do, we're not good enough.
Yeah, we're an imposter. And we know, obviously, this is men or women, but I just think it's so fascinating that the actual term came because of the condition or this thing so intensely for women, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just the idea that like, if you find out who I really am, like that's what keeps coming up for me. And I think we do that outside of the workplace, of course.
Oh my gosh.
But
yeah.
it's literally like, so many of us are just all walking around completely terrified that if you knew the real me, or if you really knew the truth, or if you really knew how like insecure or terrified I was, you wouldn't either want to work with me or have anything to do with me.
Be in a relationship with me.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm just like, amen. Like everybody is feeling this.
Yeah.
And I think that we were talking about this a little bit, how social media perpetuates this even more, because what you're seeing on Instagram or Facebook or wherever are these picture perfect lives.
Yeah.
And the delusion is that I'm the only one that feels this way. I'm the only imposter. And I think that's why it creates so much shame.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so isolating in your mind.
Yeah.
Because you think I'm the only one that is actually dealing with, because everybody else is the real deal. Because that's what we're judging it by, seeing what we see on social media. Everybody else is the real deal except for me, which is, oh my gosh, I feel like the root of so many issues that we have collectively as humans is when we believe we're the only one who's dealing with something, when usually it's completely universal.
Oh, absolutely. And then like what you said, shame, I was reading some of this other, scientific research on this, because there's a lot of beautiful research about what it means to feel like an imposter and a fraud. And of course, it makes sense to me that you would feel that innate sense of shame, not even so much guilt, but just like something, I am bad, like something is like defectively wrong with me. And then the other thing they said, you'll notice, is serious depression. And even kind of some of that suicidal ideation, because that like exposure is like at the core of me. If I am this flawed and bad, and if I really believe that about myself, and then you set your entire life up trying to protect this image that you have created, and and the harder you work to make the image, like we've talked about in a few other episodes, the masks, if you work that hard to try to protect that, anything that gets close to exposing the true you, so to speak, think about all the things we do to try to like avoid getting exposed, but also how hard we would be willing to sacrifice or reject or punish just to keep people from actually seeing that real version of who we think we are, even though it's not true. It's just the thing we're trying to protect. But
well, and in the flip side of that, what's so interesting is what we desire more than ever is to be loved and accepted for the true us.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's the caveat, is you end up sacrificing yourself for this image of yourself.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like a prison.
Yes.
I mean, you have kind of created the walls to your own prison, and you have to behave like, look like, be in alignment with this quote unquote fake version of yourself that the world knows you as. I mean, and think how horrible that has to feel. And I remember being in that position when I was married.
Yes.
Oh my God. I mean, I remember reading Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, and she started talking about authenticity and being your true self. And I always knew that I wasn't my true self. And it wasn't ever like a conscious decision to be an imposter or to wear masks. I wasn't actively thinking to myself, okay, now's the time to put this mask on. I mean, these are survival, fight or flight, kind of reactionary things that we do unconsciously to protect ourselves. But I remember reading that book and thinking, oh my God, no wonder I'm so miserable. No wonder I am starving for love, because nobody can even get to the real me, to even love the real me. And that idea of being a fraud, I didn't feel at home with myself, with my life, because it wasn't me.
Yeah. And isn't that interesting to think about though, too? Because, we were talking about this earlier. Where is the difference between, and maybe you can answer this, the difference between like that phrase, fake it till you make it?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, even in your relationship, you didn't know, you didn't want it to, it's like, you didn't realize that like there was some major dissonance maybe going on. Maybe internally you're saying you did, but like in some regard, you want to show up the best version of you. You want to do good by your partner, or even if it's in a career, it's like you're starting a new job and you want to act like you know what you're doing, and you hope to God you can like learn really fast and like kind of pick it up quickly. So where's the line between fake it till you make it and acting as if and doing all these things that would maybe be considered as a fake, but like, when is that healthy to do that? Do you know what
I think
I'm
it can be really healthy.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's one of the ways in which you reprogram your neural pathways is actually practicing the emotions of your future self or envisioning your future self and living out of that place. I remember, for example, when I was within doTERRA, when I started out with doTERRA and the essential oil company that I work with. And when I started that, I had no sales training. I had no leadership skills, really, like formal leadership training, no corporate training. I'm a college dropout. I mean, there was nothing on my quote unquote resume that would have qualified me to do the job that I set out to do. And I remember thinking, as long as I know 1% more than the people that I'm sitting down with and explaining, like I didn't have any essential oil training or anything like that, but I was hungry and I was willing to learn, but I had to present myself as an expert. And I had to sort of lead ahead of myself, honestly, in the old saying of act as if. And I think there's something that can be really healthy about that. But I think that the thing where it shifts from unhealthy to healthy is when it's unconscious versus conscious. And so when you're unconscious, that's when your lizard brain, survival brain, is making decisions based on comparison, based on trying to earn love.
Fear,
Fear, anxiety, trying to please other people, adhering to the expectations maybe of the way that you were raised and what your parents thought that you were, who you were supposed to be, things like that. All of those kinds of choices, when we choose to put on masks in those regards, that's largely unconscious. It's just literally survival. In order to get love, I have to do and have to be X, Y, Z. And that's when we feel, I think oftentimes like, oh my God, like that's where the depression comes in, because it is a misalignment with who we are.
Yeah.
But where it can be healthy, I really believe, is when you're consciously choosing to live ahead of yourself, to train your brain to eventually catch up. And so, for example, if I choose to identify myself as a phenomenal podcaster, then I'm going to begin to do a lot of research, and I'm going to start talking like a phenomenal podcaster. I'm going to get the right equipment. I'm going to get the right editing. I'm going to do the right branding, whatever it is, because I need to essentially live up to my identity. Grow into it. And that can be really healthy, because that can be a lot of healthy motivation. Like as you start seeing yourself and creating a new identity for yourself that's positive, then everything in your environment wants to speed up to get consistent with how you're choosing to define yourself. And so you can use that to your advantage. Like, I want to be somebody who is extremely wealthy. So if I start communicating like I'm wealthy, you know, what would I do differently if I had all this money in the bank? What choices would I be making? You know, because if I'm not that way now and I'm living out of scarcity, I might make decisions out of fear. If I'm living in a place of abundance as my future self, I'm going to be making different decisions. So in that regard, because it's conscious, I think that faking it till you make it, or acting as if, is one of the most powerful tools for self-transformation.
Yes. And what I hear you saying is it's like living in your growth edge versus like, and you know, the other is almost like this scarcity. I keep seeing that. What was his name in the Lord of the Rings? That Schmeagol. He's like, my precious.
Gollum.
Yeah, or like Gollum. Yeah. It's like holding on to something so tight versus like, because you're terrified of somebody really like taking it or seeing it, versus the other has this like momentum to it that's like living on your growth edge. It takes you outside of your comfort zone. It's moving you forward, and the other feels really constrained and like contained.
Well, and I think a good indicator is, do I feel slightly like, a little bit nervous or also excited and motivated to excel, or am I shutting down? Is it creating shame?
Exactly. And, for me personally, in my story, this last year, I've just kind of, I'm a life coach too, and we're all about, affirmations and positive thinking and manifesting. And I've noticed there's this kind of, like I'm doing all the right things, all the tools that we've accumulated, and we've really like, we have cultivated these tools that we teach other people to do. And I'm trying to create and manifest certain things in my life, and it's not happening yet. Right. So if I'm not careful, I go into I'm a fraud. Like it's not even working. None of this stuff even works. And I started realizing just recently, I was like, I don't necessarily want to be the guru or the expert or look like I've got things so together anymore, that maybe that's what was creating that feeling of fraud. To me, the new conversation is where I just want to go, me too. It's like, you know what? It is hard right now. And here's what I'm doing that kind of helps me feel a little bit better. Maybe it helps you too. Yeah. Like what you were saying, where you just want to share maybe like 1 or 2 steps down the road. That's that same feeling. And that alone shifted that feeling of, oh gosh, what do I have to offer? And none of it's, I feel like a big old fake phony fraud, because I'm still hurting, or I'm still trying to manifest my partner, or whatever it is. Right. It's like just even that slight shift of going, no, it's okay to actually be human, and be vulnerable, and actually say, I don't know why X, Y, and Z is not helping me create the life that I truly want yet. I'm still in it. I'm still in the process. I'm choosing to stay as positive I can, and say it hurts, and say me too, Well,
and what's so interesting about that is what you did in that situation is you shifted your identity.
Yeah.
Because you were giving yourself an expectation that you internally didn't want to live up to.
That's right.
Right. So it's like, I actually don't want to be the guru. I don't want to be the expert. So what is that going to cause? Self-sabotage.
Absolutely.
So it's like, how can you manifest something that you actually don't want to be?
Well, have you ever noticed this too? This is what happens with spiritual teachers or religious leaders. Have you noticed this? Is they all of a sudden become these on a pedestal, like separate than, like almost kind of like you're not allowed to be human.
Yeah, it's so dangerous.
It's so dangerous. And it happens so quickly. Like we know this world very well and intimately, right? And so there's a part of it that's like, when there is heartache or struggle or insecurities, you don't even know how to share that with friends or your followers or your congregate people, because all of a sudden they've got a story about you that you're supposed to be different or separate or special, or you have the answer. And so help me God, if you don't have the answer and I don't have the answer, then who does?
We're all screwed.
Right. So then that immediately creates a separation.
Yeah.
And then you have to maintain this facade. You have to maintain this idea that you are not human and that you don't have problems.
Well, it's kind of like this happens. Let's take it down a couple notches.
Yeah.
This happens in motherhood.
All the time.
This happens as a partner to somebody else, bosses, being a wife.
Ugh.
I mean, this happens everywhere. When you believe there is some ideal out there that you're supposed to live up to, of course you're going to feel like a fraud, because like you said, there's no space to be in it, to be in process, to be human. And then the reality is what connects us is the fact that we're all human. Nobody has it all figured out.
No.
And nobody.
It gets real dangerous when someone doesn't have the self-awareness, and they start trying to protect this imposter. So much so that's when the damage gets done in relationships, with your children, with your colleagues, or with your coworkers.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, it's amazing what happens when you start protecting that image, the larger image. But I want to go back for a second to this idea of being a fraud, like the word fraud. Because when I think about this, when my clients have come to me and they say, I feel like I'm going to get exposed. Somebody's going to find out that this isn't really the real me. Or they feel like that their everything that they've built is going to be in jeopardy because they're not the authentic, true version of themselves. And what I find is interesting is that typically when people are afraid that they are a fraud or having this imposter syndrome, they're really worried about like 1 or 2 or 3 people.
Mm-hmm. Everyone's going to think it. And really it's just, 1, 2, or 3 people.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is like what happens is we end up constructing our entire image, our entire identity based on the projected idea that somebody is expecting us to be one way or another. Or what happens with social media is we look at maybe a couple of people that are in our same sphere and our same, whatever it is that we're doing. Like, let's say I'm a podcaster and I start looking at people who are really successful at podcasting. If I am judging myself and posturing myself against them, and that's the only thing that I'm going by, all of a sudden, I'm going to have a lot of shame because I'm not them. And so when we start putting our focus externally on other people, that to me is when we really start feeling like a fraud. Yeah. When we're not gauging internally, who am I? Am I living in alignment with my true self? What am I meant to do? What is my calling? Who am I meant to be? Like, we are the judge against ourselves. I mean, the only imposter that I think that we can actually be is against ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, what is your definition of success? That's why it's so beautiful that this topic we've been on this last month, because most people don't do the inner spiritual work to find out who they really are. And then they're just constantly trying to live up to, or like live in comparison to, or keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And so much of this, though, I think it does come from childhood, because there's something inside that literally tells you that who you are at your core isn't enough.
Yeah.
And even though you've done all these achievements, or you've created this beautiful family, or, you've got all this love in your life, or whatever it is, there's still some sort of underlying voice that's telling you that who you are at the core of who you are is not enough. And if they really knew, then they wouldn't like you. You would be punished, exiled, death, whatever our crazy fears are, right? And then it just keeps you in the loop. It just continues the whole cycle of destruction patterns. And so how do you interrupt that?
Hey, y'all. I just wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to remind you to subscribe to this podcast. I know that emails get lost in your spam folder, so subscribing means my episodes come right to your phone. That way you won't miss out on any of the Living Fully Alive episodes. And speaking of episodes, I hope that you are thoroughly enjoying this month's topic of identity, and make sure to go back and listen to the other 4 episodes on this topic, as this is the final episode for this month. But I'm excited to announce that next month our topic will be on community. We'll explore where the breakdown of community happened, what we are all truly longing for when it comes to our friendships, and how to cultivate and create powerful communities. You won't want to miss these conversations next month, so make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next week. All right, now back to my conversation with Lindsley. Well, I'm just thinking, when you are stuck in your ego, the ego's hunger is never satisfied. And so the ego is always looking at ways to present itself to the world that's pleasing, in ways that are pleasing. And it's never enough. There's no achievement too big that will satisfy the ego. And so and you see this a lot. I mean, think about Robin Williams.
Yes.
And committing suicide. Somebody who was like one of the greatest actors of our time. And you see this over and over again in the entertainment industry. People you've idolized as the best end up committing suicide. Because there is this deep sense inside of themselves that they don't believe like they are enough. And I think if we're honest, most of us, probably all of us, have felt this at least at some point.
Yeah.
If not the majority of our lives.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think it really is stemming back into that core belief of who we are at our core. And to me, it starts with fundamental beliefs about ourselves. Because one of the things that I had to shift that was massive, it was like a game changer for me, is this concept of our lovability. And I remember starting to say, I cannot earn love and I cannot lose love.
That's nice. I like that.
Because my lovability is not on the table. It's not up for negotiation. Like nothing can change the essence of my lovability because I breathe and I exist on this planet.
I am worthy of love.
I am worthy of love.
Yeah.
Period. And nothing, no matter what I do or don't do, it won't change it. No matter how successful I am or not successful, or anything, nothing can change the fact that who I am, the essence of me, and not the ego me, but my highest self me, the core soul essence, that part, that real me is lovable. And that's where it begins. And that's where it ends. That to me is a fundamental foundational belief.
And that is so crucial to get to that place. We know that theoretically, we understand logically that that's important. But if we don't, it is like life or death.
Oh, yeah.
It affects not only whether we suicide issues, but it affects relationships with your partners, with your children, because if not, this is bleeding into everything. Think about how many marriages are broken or relationships die because the other partner doesn't get it. They don't get that who they are is enough, and they're constantly in defense mode or trying to protect something. It's so sad to me. It's like, unless you do this kind of work, the risk that you're taking on the life that you could have versus what you're settling for, and then you end up destroying so much. So anyways.
No, I love that. Really, you're exactly right. And I think that that's the point. And when you peel back all the layers of the onion to the core and the center, this is it. It's sort of like identity starts with this and it ends with this. Who are you at your core? Your core is lovable. And I always say you are lovable just because you breathe, which means it's not conditional. That's involuntary. I breathe involuntarily, and I'm lovable just because I breathe. Something that I cannot change, I cannot earn, I cannot shift. It's happening day in and day night, which means I am always lovable.
Can you imagine how much of our energy is just wasted trying to protect the imposter, trying to keep the fraud from being exposed? How much energy and time is wasted, and what that would look like if we were able to actually just be channel all that into just being authentic and being lovable and embracing that. I know it sounds like we're talking about utopia here, but
well, we are human.
Yeah. Yes.
We're
it's having insecurities. It's part of
It's part of it.
Yeah.
And to me, the goal is not to just have all that go away and I just love myself 24/7, because we know that's not realistic.
Right.
But the goal is when I'm not, and I'm in a space of judgment or criticism or longing or attaching or needing in an unhealthy way, obviously need is fine, but you know what I mean? Then catching myself and going, okay, where is this coming from? Is this my ego? Is this the wounding from my inner child? Is this subconscious programming? And again, go back and listen to last week's episode so that you can have some of this foundational information for this. But to me, it's like, okay, in this moment, let me come back to me. Let me come back to my highest self, that wise one who's sort of floating above observing. And the way that fleshes itself out, it's so messy. It's imperfect action. But to me, the growth happens when we can catch ourselves in that state of fear. I have to be this. I need to do this in order to earn and gain love. To catch it and say, wait a minute, no. I am lovable. Let me find my footing again. Let me center into me. Let me get aligned with me. I'm okay. Like we talked about this last week, of looking in the eyes of yourself in the mirror as your little girl and saying, I love you so much. You're doing such a great job.
I know I had to do that to myself yesterday.
You did?
Yeah. You know how we all just have those days, and it was like, I just need to come back to center. I need to look at myself in the mirror and just be like, everything's okay. You're going to be good. You're loved. So what would you say? Cause I'm thinking, I don't know why. the imposter and the fraud thing, I can see it, have struggled with it in myself, but I feel like I've even been in relationships with people who struggle with that, and it's affected our dynamic so much. So maybe that's why I keep kind of coming back to the relationship thing. But what would you tell somebody, or what would you say to someone that sees this flaring up in their partner or in their children or in a coworker, and it's affecting their relationship. Because like you're saying, you can't make somebody get that they're lovable.
No.
And yet we can all spot when somebody is not really being themselves.
Right.
We call them shady, or we call it not being authentic, or whatever it is. And yet you desperately want to connect to that person, but you can't seem to get. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what would you say, or how should they show up or be with somebody who's in this imposter syndrome?
It's tricky, I think, because it depends on how intimate your relationship is.
Yeah.
Because I can think about people in my life where I've seen them, and not people who are living maybe this way all the time, but sort of drop into that out of, a fear reaction or whatever. And I can kind of look at them and say, hey. And these are usually my words. When I see somebody pretending to be what they're not, or when they are pretending to be happier than they are, or whatever, faking an emotion.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can kind of read it in their energy, or you can read it on their face. And I'll usually look at them. And again, this is an intimate relationship.
Yeah.
So it depends how intimate your relationship is. But I'll say, hey, I see you.
Yeah.
And just kind of smile, like in a really compassionate way.
Yeah.
I see you.
Yeah.
And I'm here when you're ready.
Yeah. Because you're right. It's like a curveball. It's like not everybody is going to be full blown imposter.
No.
Like we all have versions of this. There are some people who live so in the imposter that they're like we said, they're dangerous people. Right. And so it's good to remember that like we all have these moments, and we all want somebody to look at us and go, I see you. I need to see the real you. So what's coming up for you? Or like, what do you need?
Yeah. Well, I remember like one of the most loving things that you can do. I remember Bentley said this to me at the beginning of our relationship. He said, you can be whoever you need to be to the people out there. But when you walk in the doors of this house, you get to be you. And you don't need to be anybody else but you.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful because I really struggled with this as a strong 3 wing on the Enneagram, that idea of having a pleasing image.
Well, and you grew up in a family that was very in the public eye.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So there's a lot of expectation of our name. You are a Hyatt. Remember what that means when like my parents would say that to us when we would leave the house. Basically you represent the family. And so I've just learned this. It's been ingrained in me. If, you smile and, you in a way you don't really get to be superhuman. You have to always sort of have your shit together. And for me, before I had any awareness of this, even this is 3 years ago when I met Bentley and had that conversation, I mean, I was still very much in that. And I'm so grateful because what happened is with that, just sort of like, hey, you get to be you in this space. Now what's happened is I've been able to walk my quote unquote public self closer and closer and closer and closer to my real self.
Yes.
That I feel like the most me that I've ever felt, because I don't need, now that I kind of had that love and acceptance at home, now I can take that out to the world and go, you know what? It was a beautiful mirror for me to go, okay, this was one place that I was loved and accepted. I'm going to test this out a little bit publicly. And I've done that more and more and more. And people's opinions have mattered less to me.
Yeah, you don't have to prove yourself as much anymore.
But I think what was so amazing about that moment, bringing it back to your question, is he held the space for me to be me.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the most loving things we can do to each other.
Yeah.
Is to look at somebody in the eyes and say, you're free to be you with me.
Yeah. And isn't it funny? Like, I'm even thinking about how this is so funny how this bleeds into everything. I mean, my sisters used to make fun of me because when I would answer the phone, my voice would change, be like, hello. It's like, ooh, who are you? You know what I mean?
Totally.
It's like we do this all the time, don't we?
My sisters, I mean, talk about if you need somebody to kick your ass, my sister's always like, stop doing that.
Yeah.
Like they'll see me do something on social media and they're like, that was fake. Yeah. Or like, that was a fake laugh. Or, whatever it is. And I'm like, dang it. Like I'm caught.
Like I was really trying. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute, snap back in to me. And I've seen that a lot, like with people who are in the public eye, they have sort of their stage self or their public self God, that's got to just be so exhausting.
Well, and I mean, I'll just be candid. Like the whole social media thing, it's like it's the necessary evil in order to build your business, right? And yet there's such a part of me that's like, I have to go into game face mode. I literally feel like I have to become this persona and this brand, right? And that's a whole conversation in itself, how a brand is becoming something that you just like, where's the line between like stepping into the greatness of that or actually becoming this fake version of yourself? But anyways, just that all the pressure that's connected to that. Sometimes I'd just rather not do anything.
It shuts you down.
It shuts me down. And so that's the other thing too. It's like, there's something about how do you just keep yourself stepping into your greatness while also feeling really uncomfortable, like we were saying, or even just like how do you do things that continue to keep you growing and without being like feeling like you're feeling a fraud or an imposter or a phony or fake, and it doesn't feel authentic. I don't know.
Well, and I think that what it is it's grounding.
Yeah.
It's coming back to you and listening to that still small voice inside of yourself that is the highest self. And you essentially take everything to that voice. Because to me, you can grow, and you can grow in a way that is in a fraud way, or you can grow in an authentic way. And you're the only one that's going to really know what the inner motivation is. But if you have some wounds or traumas or whatever from childhood that you haven't dealt with, or you have an overactive ego that's really trying to have a good image to the world, you're going to have to break some of those walls down to come back to the real you, and then measure everything up against that. Because it's like, otherwise you're chasing your tail.
Oh my gosh.
It's a nightmare.
Empty bucket. Absolutely.
So I think that really is, if you can sort of like ground in and say, wait a minute, why am I doing this right now? What is motivating? Whose voice is that really? Who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for myself, or am I doing this for my audience? Am I doing this for myself, or am I doing this for my mom or my dad? Even when you are an adult, am I doing this for myself, or am I doing this for my neighbor, Sarah, down the street? Am I doing this for myself, or am I doing that for this other chick who has another podcast?
Exactly.
Like, who are you doing these things for?
Yep.
And is it coming from a pure place within yourself that is like, it doesn't have anything to prove, honestly.
Yeah. Is it coming from a place of fear and scarcity, or is it coming from a place of abundance and growth edge? Because I'm even thinking about all the roles we've talked about, like the church wife, the church woman, like the soccer mom, like all these little small worlds that we're all in, even though they aren't necessarily in the public eye. We all have some version of this where we want to maintain some sort of image or status, and we just think it's up to us in order to get our needs met. In order for us to get ahead in life, we have to be something other than who we really are. And if we would literally just stop spending so much energy on that, I don't know. That's just a real aha for me. It's just this idea of who would it look like if we really put all that into being authentic, and discovering who that was and being okay with that.
Well, because like you said, if you were to swap and take all of the energy that you're expending on keeping up the facade, wearing the masks, all of that, which we all do in our own ways, and shift that into slowing down and pausing and checking in. It's really about mindfulness, checking in, because there is a dissonance inside of it's like gut level dissonance that you can feel. If you slow down, you can feel it and you go, oh, that doesn't feel good. I don't like this. This is not the real me. And I think that the journey of living fully alive, so much of it is about slowing down and tuning in to our gut level reaction, because we know when we're not being ourselves.
Yes. And it's a snowball effect too, because you know how it's like you do this for so long, all of a sudden it's like, I don't even know how to unravel this. And that's why so many people who live in that fraud state are constantly busy.
Yeah.
They keep themselves busy all the time. Like you said, you have to slow down. And most people, when you're so deep in the imposter, you are terrified.
Well, because the fear is exposure.
Yes.
And if you slow down,
yes,
you're going to get exposed. It's sort of like, the Tasmanian devil. All of a sudden, you're going to realize, oh, it was just a little guy. It wasn't a tornado after all.
Exactly.
And so I don't even know if that's the right.
No, I was tracking.
I mean? Yeah. I'm like, I don't really remember watching that cartoon, but I feel like that fits. But yeah, I think that it requires, it's brave. I mean, it really is brave because it is super vulnerable. And this is why we always talk about getting support, finding an amazing therapist who can help you work through this, working with a life coach, finding some supportive books or supportive groups. I mean, there's a lot of support to be had out there. And there's a lot of people doing this work, which I think is encouraging. Because I think, again, the misconception where it gets tricky is when you believe you're the only one with this issue.
Yes.
And let's just call it what it is, that every single human being is dealing with this.
Absolutely. And, I just thought about this too. The self-deprecating person too. It's like the same coin, different side. Like the one that actually, and by no means do I need to like dog Taylor Swift because we all love Taylor Swift. But you know how like every single time she wins an award, she's like, what? No. Oh my gosh, really? It's like this
false humility.
False humility. Yes. And there's something about that that's almost kind of like, is that kind of the imposter too? I'm not saying Taylor Swift. I'm just saying that thing.
I'll tell you what's interesting, and I'm glad you brought this up because there is a calculated vulnerability that's happening right now. I see it a lot, especially with the circles that I run in. That's, thank God, because of Brene Brown, she sort of coined.
We love her.
Oh, I love her. I mean, she really is like the
We've
mother.
We've talked about her now 2 or 3 times. Yeah.
Brene, we love you. Come on the show.
Yeah.
But she talks about, she sort of coined the idea of vulnerability, right, in the public eye. I mean, she really brought that to the surface as a whole thing. And for me, now that that's become sort of an overused buzzword in the self-help, self-development community, now what we're seeing within branding is a very calculated, I'm going to pretend to be vulnerable to help my audience believe that I'm vulnerable, or I'm going to, with quote fingers, be authentic.
Oh,
like
gosh.
They'll set up a posed photo. I've been guilty of this. Okay. Set up a posed photo of themselves, like let's say crying or something.
Oh, sure.
And I'm being authentic, but it's like, but you're not, because if you were authentic, you'd be in that moment and being a mess, and you wouldn't be using it as a part of your branding.
Yes.
And so that gets really tricky too. It's like we're trying to over-engineer vulnerability and authenticity to the point where it's now not authentic and it's not vulnerable.
It's manipulation.
It's manipulation.
Yes.
And so I think we have to be, again, so careful. It's like, thank God I have people in my life who kick my ass on this all the time because I have that tendency to want to do that. But it's where it's like, is this really vulnerable? And if it is, be in the vulnerability of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you can't ever show that stuff on social media. I'd do that.
Sure.
It's not about that, but it's sort of like, again, what's the motivation behind it?
Yes. Check yourself. Yeah.
Check yourself. Is this me being really me and being really vulnerable? Or is this my ego playing in vulnerability?
Yeah.
And I think there's a big difference.
Yeah.
And so sort of like the Taylor Swift thing, it's like, are you really humble? And we don't
know her. Yeah.
But, or are you playing at humility because you know that's better for your likability factor?
Yes. Yeah.
And again, we got to come back. Am I being an imposter? Am I being a fraud? And again, there's no shame of that. Like when we find ourselves in these moments, and I've had to do this where I go, oh man, I did that because I thought
Guilty.
it was going to be a good, likable post or a likable share or whatever it is. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay and allowed to be human. And I can check myself and say, you know what? That doesn't feel authentic for me. And next time I'm going to shift and do it differently.
Yeah.
I can always learn. I can always grow. And so when we find ourselves pretending, and when we find ourselves putting these masks on, when we find ourselves being motivated just to be loved,
yes,
it's just like what we need in those moments is more self-compassion and less judgment, and go, you know what? I'm human. And sometimes my ego leads. And sometimes my little girl is so afraid that she will do things out of the necessity to get that love in that moment. And that's okay.
Absolutely. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, even for myself, just to be vulnerable, since you just were, like how many courses and certifications can I honestly take before I finally just own the fact that I'm X, Y, and Z? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like all the things we do, even out of that fear and scarcity and insecurity of like, no, I need one more degree. I need one more program. I need one more book. I need one more something, because I don't believe I am enough yet.
Yeah.
So it shows up even in that regard too. It's like, it's either the excessive, bold, I'm a big old, let me be really loud and on stage and pretend like I'm somebody I'm not, or it's the, let me just hide back here, even though I'm probably qualified and I'm overqualified, and yet I'm still terrified of being a fraud that it's making me want to hide. It's like it shows up in two different ways. Excessive or kind of like that repressed side. I don't know.
No, it makes total sense.
We need to come up with a term for these things.
I know. If only we were psychologists.
I mean,
our next degree. No, but I think you're. It's like at the end of the day, though, it is coming back to you, 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 over and over and over again, aligning back with yourself wherever you are,
right?
Because our self is always changing, always growing, always evolving. So things will change, but that where I sit today in this present moment is enough.
Yeah.
And then I have every, my own permission to have a voice and to share and to speak. I don't need to over prove anything. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
I am okay exactly with whatever knowledge I have today.
Yep. Self-worth and self-acceptance.
Yep.
Mic drop.
Mic drop. Oh, it's like
the end.
Always comes back to that.
It does. Isn't that amazing?
Well, I think that actually is a good place to stop because I think that the beauty of this conversation is that hopefully as you're listening, you can identify yourself with us as we talk about this, that you're not the only one that has imposter syndrome. You're not the only one who feels like a fraud from time to time or most often. And there are ways in which you can truly set that down and work towards, and it's a journey, it's not going to happen overnight, but work towards really loving and accepting yourself as you are. And what happens with that, and you know this, and I know this, that is freedom.
My gosh, yes.
When you can be you and you don't have to be anybody else and you get to show up as you, there is nothing more freeing and peaceful about that. Like I have lived both. I have lived in constant prove mode and I have finally, and I'm not done, but I have come a lot closer to being my true self, and the levels of peace that I've experienced within the last year, holy cow.
Yeah, phenomenal.
And
like you literally, physically, people start changing. When you live in that state of being in your truth, the physical manifestation of that is lighter and brighter and more peaceful. And we've said that before. People have been commenting to you this last year. I know they did for me when I've been going through my healing the last couple of years. So it's like we carry this stuff.
Yeah.
Like living in the imposter and trying to maintain that, it's so exhausting, and it physically takes its toll on you, and it ages you, and it creates disharmony and dis-ease in the body.
Yep.
So it literally, it is a life or death situation, It
is. And certainly your quality of life.
Yeah.
I mean, like how you're going to experience your life and enjoy it, or just the weight, the heaviness of having to keep it all together.
Good one.
I was going to say.
This is good convo.
This is good convo. Yeah, we could talk and talk and talk, but I think it's probably about time we get to happy hour in real life.
I was going to say, what time is it?
It's almost 5:00. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Lindsley and I. We just love having these conversations with you. It's so fun for us, and we know that from the emails that we've gotten that you're so enjoying it. And of course, always feel free to reach out and let us know what you're learning, what you're picking up on, because that's fun for us to hear from you guys. So please feel free to reach out. All right. So make sure to tune in next week for our new monthly topic. We'll make sure to share that with you in the upcoming email and post, but we're going to be together again and again.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Party.
so fun. But of course, if you haven't listened to the other episodes within this month's topic of identity, go back and listen to them. We have some really amazing conversations and episodes with me. And then we have a fabulous guest for this topic. So go back, listen to old episodes from this month. And of course, we will see you next week. Thanks, guys. Bye. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you got some amazing nuggets to take home and start implementing into your life. And if you're looking for show notes and links, head on over to maryhyatt.com/show. Again, that's maryhyatt.com/show. And if you loved today's episode, why not bring your girlfriends along this journey of becoming fully alive with you? Just give a quick share of this episode to your social channels and enjoy those debriefing convos with your besties. Thanks again, and I can't wait to connect with you next week.